This is not a math show. Snap judgments are for feelings instead. So rather than get into, I don't know, 20.5 million here, 2.5 million there, settlement this, settlement that, I don't know if that's something that we can really do, Birm.
I don't know. We just finished up 75 minutes or so with Ross
More
Bjork,
math.
the athletic director here at Ohio State. Really insightful, but a lot of complicated stuff that I'm not smart enough to figure out. When we get a chance to really get a state of the program, not the Ohio State program, but the athletic program here, football, not exclusively football, it is pretty remarkable how large everything is. And now we find today that Ohio State is going to basically be funding 4 athletic departments, 4 programs. Mm-hmm. And the rest of it is kind of on its own. and that was the thing. Like, it's women's basketball, women's volleyball, Ohio State men's basketball, and Ohio State men's football will receive the $18 million allotment for revenue sharing, profit sharing. And then the rest of the 32 athletic sports here at Ohio State are going to have to figure out a way to survive.
Well, they're sustained by the fact that
scholarships.
Yeah, Ohio State is adding 91 scholarships, so that's the change, and then each individual program beyond there, because Ohio State is committed to maintaining all 36 of those intercollegiate athletic opportunities, otherwise known as teams. So the scholarship money, I think that gave us some clarity on how that works for the $20.5 million, how that applies for Ohio State, and you can just then assume that most of that $18 million, even though it is being divided up into those 4 pots, the largest pot is going to be football. So we know that that's the math piece, but I do think, he's Jeremy Birmingham, I'm Austin Ward.
Did you already do that?
Yeah, and welcome back. It's great to see you all again. I think to me why it's more important to look at the way that Ross Bjork, the details he provides, the voice that Ohio State has in these ongoing conversations, the plan that they have, where it's not like, oh, we were just bamboozled by what happened last Friday night or not prepared. Ohio State, we already knew that they'd been preparing for this inevitability with the House settlement all along, but the depth of preparations is remarkable. And then I think that then translates into the next thing, which comes up all the time for Ohio State and their athletic director and their programs as a whole. Are they going to fight for themselves in the college landscape and put their thumbprint on it in a way that helps Ohio State? Because I feel like partially you look at the $18 million, and even if that went fully to Ohio State football, that wouldn't have covered the roster. It feels like if you ask them, isn't this hurt Ohio State football? Like, that would be something they didn't like. And Ross Bjork is sort of like, well, playing field's great. Everyone can allocate their resources. But here's Columbus, here's the Block O, here's the businesses, here's the Buckeye Sports Group to fund all this. Like, yeah, just when it feels like there's a way that you could look at it and say, well, this doesn't seem like it would be fully advantageous for Ohio State. Ross Bjork says, yes, that may be so, but here's the 10 different ways that we're making up for that. I would say a year and a half ago, again, just to put a bow on it, that hire, I was skeptical. The way that people viewed him, this would sound familiar to the way that I've talked about Matt Patricia. Yeah. Tried to keep an open mind. Ross Bjork has done a phenomenal job, and a day like today, those 75 minutes, I think, are a public-facing window into why he was the right guy at the right time for the Buckeyes.
Well, I mean, he was hired ostensibly as a fundraiser in chief, and he said that last year was the Ohio State's best fundraising year of all time. He said, $80 million. And again, we're not going to talk too many numbers here.
Well, I can't remember them all.
But the facts are, and the fact is, it's not Ohio State football that will be the one that most impacted by this revenue sharing, profit sharing, because the Ohio State football program will be so successful at bringing in money from outside sources and third-party NIL that I don't think that's a concern. Now, if you're a basketball program at Ohio State, that becomes a whole different ball of wax. I think it gets significantly harder for someone like Jake Diebler moving forward, because if you think around college football, there's 134 Division I teams. There's 60 A4 or Autonomous 4 or whatever they're called now, Power 4. I don't know. There's 350 Division I college basketball teams. If you think about like Villanova, for example, they have all that same amount of money that they're able to, but that they can put $10 million out of their basketball program, and Ohio State's going to do $1.5 million out of the basketball program. So that's where I think things get really interesting, is how that third-party opportunity, which Ohio State and Columbus and Ohio still have more than pretty much anybody when it comes to college sports. That's when things get really interesting, because football, like, brands out there are going to want to be connected to Jeremiah Smith and Caleb Downs of the world. It's the other sports that I think are going to have a much bigger hurdle to climb.
Yeah, I do think that will be really interesting. We have not, to this point, really covered Ohio State basketball on a day-to-day basis, and it won't work the same way because of the support that applies to the business, applies to the fan base. Like, there are people that are passionate about it, but then that becomes the challenge for them. If Ohio State men's basketball is critically important to you, then those businesses are going to have to step up and say, we want to partner with this player or that player or this recruit,
right.
Because that's sort of the situation. I think there has to be an acknowledgement. When you look at and listen to Ross Bjork talk about it, he said that they're paying attention to all these metrics, which I was very surprised that women's volleyball was the fourth one. I think we could have come up with, maybe that's women's hockey because you look at the national championship success, or
men's
maybe
hockey.
That's track or soccer. I mean, I don't
tennis.
know.
I mean,
anything. The ones that you see competing year in and year out for national
They
championships.
just built a huge, big old tennis building across the street. So
They did. So, but that tells you that they're paying attention to whatever those attendance numbers are, whatever the social engagement is, whatever the television ratings on BTN are, that women's volleyball needs to be part of that bucket. So you would have assumed that men's basketball would be, and it is, but you're not guaranteed a larger piece of the pie if you don't then fill the shot, or if you don't have businesses involved to land these players. So like that, out of those four, that becomes, I think, maybe the most treacherous situation, because you know that the overwhelming majority, and Ross Bjork would not say that the house settlement percentage was going to be followed by Ohio State, which I think, to me, means that the number for football will be higher than 75%.
I'd hope so. I mean, let's call it what it is. I mean, football is the driver of everything else on this campus and in the state of Ohio. I mean, Ohio State football is more important, and no one wants to say it that way or that bluntly, but that's what it is. I mean, Ohio State, the other 36 athletic programs exist because Ohio State football is successful. So as long as they can, until some other judge comes in with a collapsing Title IX responsibility for the schools to split things exactly evenly, which, one thing that Ross Bjork kept saying is that the house settlement has a sturdiness to it. He kept saying the word sturdy. And I think that that's their way of saying that they feel a lot of the next level of lawsuits that we've discussed in every iteration of conversation we've had about this, they seem to be at least somewhat optimistic that they're not going to be bogged down
bordering on confident, not just optimistic. And that applies to NIL Go, which is something that we've talked about multiple times. Like, well, what happens if Deloitte says thumbs down on this?
Yeah.
Well, a judge ruled on that, and the arbitration is here. Like, it's going to be difficult to win those. And Ross Bjork projected that same sort of confidence about, Title IX. So I guess I would say, 6 days later for me, there are still opportunities where things can go awry. And I think, you can lay out what those are, and it may well still be these same two things that we're talking about that are most often pointed to. But I felt like last Friday night was step 1 out of 100, and maybe it's more like 1 out of 10. I don't know. The compliance part, the CSC, the College Sports Commission, the enforcement, the penalties, that stuff is not done, and that's going to be pretty difficult, I think, for everyone to agree to. But in terms of the financial piece of this puzzle, it feels like Ohio State has really got its arms around it and is in a good spot moving forward. And it does help as well that Ross Bjork was a key figure in shaping it. Not the house settlement, he couldn't be.
Yeah.
But everything to the side over here with the College Sports Commission and where that's all going, that's going to be stuff that I think Ohio State was already wanting and needing and is probably going to get.
Yeah, I just don't really understand. I mean, he said that the College Sports Commission, their enforcement capabilities are going to be pretty limited to a handful of items that involve arbitration, that involve things that were expressly discussed in the lawsuit and in the house settlement. So there still does seem to be at least an opening, I think, for the NCAA, which has been feckless over the last few years, to remain that way. And that is a concern, I guess, if I were to have one, considering how comfortable we've seen everyone around the country be the last handful of years, basically just telling the NCAA, screw you, you don't scare us, we're not worried about you.
Yeah. Well,
but these teams have to sign in to this house settlement, right?
And the teams, the programs, the athletic departments, and the players. So I'm with you. you and I talked to people in compliance. We've talked to coaches.
Yeah.
I was like, how is this going to be any different? This is the new NCAA. And they kept saying, no, it's not. No, it's not. And sort of if you're talking in off the record situations and more casual, it's hard to wrap your mind around it. And Ross Bjork's like, well, here is actually why. And I think the penalties, you're not going to be able to skirt them. The under the table stuff, people are still going to try. We know what programs are likely to do that. But once they set out what these penalties are, and you have the power of arbitration in a federal lawsuit, federal legislation that is dictating this, or a federal court case, I guess more accurately to put it, like that's different than the NCAA having to say, you put cream cheese on a bagel, which that's the thumbing your nose part. Now, I think where they still have to be involved, and this then comes into Michigan's Committee on Infractions part, is like establishing the rules of the game, academic requirements. That's the stuff that is cut and dry and is opted into and agreed to by the universities and the athletic departments already. What the NCAA lost control over the last 30 years are recruiting inducements, recruiting infractions, recruiting penalties, paying players. And now there's a solution for that has materialized. So this is one of the first times, and maybe it won't last. Maybe it's just the
You're optimistic?
Maybe it's just the afterglow of the Ross Bjork press conference. But
you're feeling good about it. You feel like there's structure.
I think that there were answers to the questions that I had. Now, I've covered this sport for a long enough time to know that sometimes you get a good answer and the rug is yanked out from under you. But I at least feel like, to your point, and it's okay to be skeptical, and I think that's probably the default position that everyone should have. The issues that the NCAA could not legislate before, there is now a way to do that.
Yeah, and I think that's encouraging. I guess my concern, Ross was not really able to dive into all of the specifics, but he did mention about the Deloitte and the NIL Go and what they're really looking at there when it comes to the deals that these players are bringing from third market parties, and like viability of the actual job for the pay, the market value or whatever that's going to be. I guess that's where I still go back to, like, how is the House settlement going to protect every school from immediately being sued the minute that the Deloitte people say this actually doesn't make sense. And then there's the other one, which is the pre-existing relationships, or what was he calling it, the connections between the businesses and the school already. Like, how do those? That's the one I talked about on the Thursday morning.
The Phil Knight.
The Thursday morning edition of The Beat. Like, I don't know how you tie those in without saying the school was the primary reason that person was offered that opportunity.
Sure.
So, there's still some parts of that, but I think just listening to Ross Bjork talk, like, he's clearly very well versed in this. And he mentioned that Gene Smith in Ohio State was working on this back in, like, preparing for the House settlement back in the fall of 2023. So, like, they knew
Project 36.
Project 36, another number. We're hearing them all. It's on this chalkboard. It wasn't already. I actually wrote it on Woody's chalkboard earlier. So
does Woody have 36 things up there? I only went to 30.
Yeah. So we'll find a way. But overall, like, the competency that Ohio State has in charge here, and guys and men and women who really understand the landscape, I think if there's any concerns about that, people should not have it at all. Like, they know what they're doing. And this was an all-encompassing press conference with Ross Bjork where he's talking about the stadium, where he's talking about the television deals, where he's talking about everything else. Like, we said it at the time, and you already mentioned it earlier, but there was a lot of people really skeptical of hiring Ross Bjork coming off of the Ole Miss and Texas A&M debacles or whatever. I really feel like he's the right guy to lead the program in this time. And maybe it's only a 5-year thing where he's going to be here.
Could be.
But he certainly understands this side of the sport.
All right. So if you want full, more complete breakdowns of all those numbers, Ross Bjork's 75-minute press conference is available on 10 TV Plus, in 97.1 The Fan. This Snap Judgments, that's more about vibes and emotions.
Yeah, and overall,
feelings.
I feel pretty good. I think that they really did answer a lot of the questions, and they stuff that they don't really have to.
And we'll get into more of some of the actual football impact for Ohio State on Friday's version of The Beat. It'll be a Freaky Friday, and Birm will also be able to tell you a little bit about what's going on with official visitors, and camp season is past the midway point here in this building at the Woody Hayes Athletic Center. So a lot to get to there. But these are Snap Judgments, and they are now complete. He's Birm. I'm Austin. We will talk to you tomorrow.